Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Season 2, Episode 2. Today, we are going to be covering off the fundamentals of Data Fabric. As a reminder to everybody, we will be recording this session and sharing it on Cinchi TV, as well as sending it out to you as a on-demand version via email that you can share with all of your peers. We truly do believe that the more that you're able to share this with peers, the deeper your conversations will be around Data Fabric as well as data-centric architecture. So please share it out. Today, we have the CEO and co-founder of Cinchi, Dan DeMers, joining us to take us through the fundamentals of Data Fabrics. Here's a little bit about Dan. Dan has spent over a decade as an IT executive with the most complex global financial institutions, where he was responsible for delivering mission-critical projects and technology investments. After realizing that half of all of IT resources were wasted on integration, he created Cinchi with the vision to simplify the enterprise. Please ask questions as we go along. I will be monitoring the chat box for your questions. Alternatively, you can unmute your mic and ask a question. Dan will also pause to allow you to be heard. Now, over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Joanne. Hopefully everyone can see my screen okay.
I can see it. It looks great.
All right, cool. So as Joanne mentioned, we host these sessions on a weekly basis, and the content is available on demand at cinchi.tv. So if you're joining us today for the first time, be sure to check out some past episodes that will go deeper into various subjects, many of which we'll be covering today, but at a more high or introductory level, given that we're covering the fundamentals, which is really the topic of today. So last week, we covered the core concepts and the impact from a CIO perspective. And we were lucky enough to have Sylvie, the CIO at Dropbox, join us for that session. Today, we're going to go over those same concepts, but more from what does it actually mean and how does it actually work perspective, and what it does as it relates to your target state architecture. So first of all, if you go to Cinchi TV, you'll notice that we now have a growing catalog of content. And if you filter for just specifically the learning series, you'll see the 16 episodes that we have so far, since we've been hosting these sessions on a weekly basis. So today is, by going over the fundamentals, in many ways, it's a bit of a recap on really that first season where we went deep into the various subjects. So if we take a different look at that, first of all, I just want to thank you all for joining these sessions. We've had a continuously growing viewership in terms of attendees, as well as visits to the videos on demand. What you're actually seeing is a render of what that trend is like from the first season. Joanne, I forget when we started this, maybe September or so, to up until and including last week. And I think this week is going to be continuing that same trend. So thank you all. Hope that you're getting value. And if you have any suggestions on future topics or future guests, reach out and let us know. We want to make sure that you guys are getting as much value as possible. But the core concepts here, and I think what's driving the growth in interest, not only of the learning series, but just more broadly around technologies like a Data Fabric, is the growing realization that app-centricity, which really is how we've architected systems for the past 45 years, is not the path forward. So saying it's the path to the dark side may be a little bit extreme, but when you think of the consequences, Yoda's starting to make a little bit of sense, actually. This approach results in every new application introducing a new silo. So in a world where apps are capabilities and they proliferate, there's more and more over time, not less and less, then there's more and more silos. Every new silo means that you're doing more integration. And that integration today is a huge tax. It's already a huge burden on every company on the planet, and it gets worse over time, not better. And as the scope of the applications gets smaller, as long as they continue to own data, it's the proliferation of silos. So even if you think of the evolution from monolithic to client server to 3-tier to SOA to microservices, they're smaller and more focused, which is great from a code maintenance perspective, but not so great from a data connectivity perspective because it's further pushing out the data. And in the real world, people are starting to really understand that data is all connected and it's not possible to compartmentalize and isolate it. So that's the macro shift away from app-centricity. So what does that actually look like when you're evolving from an app-centric architecture to a data-centric architecture? So first of all, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually over time. But everyone has the same starting line. Anyone who's already been in business and they have existing systems that they've bought or built, they're probably running a mix of SaaS and legacy on-prem. But this is how it works, where you have an app for everything and a database for every app, and you're doing point-to-point integrations. So you may be doing the integration over APIs or over ETL or over data replication. There's literally hundreds of different technologies that each replicate data from system A to system B such that system B can interact with that data. And that's just how it's been. So in a world where if you had nothing more than 4 applications and 3 services, you would need up to 25 integrations in order to have that connectivity. But by introducing a data fabric, which is also known as a data mesh network, then the number of integrations goes down substantially because you're avoiding the point-to-point. So each application now becomes an endpoint that's connecting into a central network. So think of it as your data in your existing systems is broken free from being imprisoned within that and placed on the fabric such that all future integrations don't rely on that application to make the data available. It's via the fabric as that enabling technology in the middle. Now, while that's a pretty big deal, that's transformational in terms of reducing the number of integrations. There's still integration, of course. The data that's in your systems needs to be connected. That one connection is an integration. But the future of data-centric architecture is one where actually that starts to trend towards 0. And this is the evolution away from integration towards collaboration. In the same way that we can collaborate on a doc using a Google Drive or SharePoint or Box or Dropbox. Being able to collaborate on data means you don't need to move that data. So the people as well as the applications are now using a collaboration platform to facilitate the data management, the persistence, the data controls, all the aspects that today you rely on application code to be able to manage. And the applications as a result now become simpler to the point where they're really more experiences than they are applications. So they're richer because they're not limited in terms of accessing a siloed data set. So they can be more intelligent, they can use the power of inference, but they're simpler from an IT perspective because they don't have the complexity and the burden of having to manage and store and integrate data. But this ultimately is that future where you transform from the left to the right by changing how you deliver new systems. So if you look at your portfolio, if you have maybe 5,000 systems and you're going to be adding another 50, some of those will make sense to buy and integrate for the fabric and mesh can help you with that. Others will make sense for you to build, and the build is where you have the opportunity to leverage collaboration and take it to that next level where you're getting the ultimate in terms of intelligence and flexibility and the least amount of overhead and IT complexity. So that's the bigger picture. Simple way to think about it is there was a moment in history before the idea of a power grid came to be. Today, we're just so used to, you have an electric device, you plug it into an outlet, what's behind that outlet, there's quite a bit of complexity. There's different sources of power, there's solar, there's nuclear, there's and how does that get generated, and how does it get distributed, and how does it get stored, and all these considerations. But luckily, you don't have to worry about that when you plug in your device, nor when you are even constructing a building. You simply need to connect it to the grid. So think of a data centricity in the same light, where think of the power grid as it's power centric, and data centric architecture is the same. There's the grid, but it's the data grid. And the thermal power plant that's at the top left, not only is it generating power, but it also needs to consume some power because the workers probably need lights. So they probably need energy. So it's producing and it's consuming. Now, some are net producers, some are net consumers, but it's the same idea. Is in the world of data, these endpoints can be applications, but they can also be people. So as I mentioned, last week we covered the 7 core concepts, specifically what it means from a CIO perspective. So we're going to look at it from a different lens today, but we're going to use the same theme and walk through those 7 core concepts. So first, let's look at a hypothetical project. So if you're applying data-centric thinking to your next project where you're going to be, let's say hypothetically, you're going to be introducing a new business capability where you otherwise would have developed a custom application, but you also need to integrate data from your existing systems. So let's say that you had 3 existing systems that were relevant for this project. So application 1, application 2, and application 3. But you needed to not only add application 4, but you needed to extend the capabilities of application 3. So we'll kind of walk through, and I'll refer back to the slide periodically as we kind of put the concepts in context to what it means to when you're delivering an actual project. But if anyone has built applications the traditional way, you'll already recognize that this is quite different than an app-centric approach. So the first concept is the idea that data should be managed as a network. So a data fabric, a data mesh are examples of that. But at a conceptual level, it's the same idea of a computer network where if you get a new device, you hook it up to a single Ethernet cable or your Wi-Fi network, and now you're connected to billions of devices. It's a network-based architecture for connecting resources together. So that is very different than the conventional approach where everything talks to everything via APIs and ETLs. But what does that actually mean? Well, when we go back to to our project template again, the box in the middle, or sorry, the circle in the middle, is managing that network. So let's zoom in on that a little bit. But you can see the 2 colors here. The pinkish color is where we're augmenting the data from this application, and the yellow data is data that is net new. Is what we call autonomous data. That is created specifically that otherwise would have been in the new siloed application that we would have stood up with a traditional approach. But notice that they're connected to each other, but the systems aren't connected to each other. And they're also connected to other data, which is separately connected to each. So it's that network-based architecture. So a different perspective, let's zoom in a little bit. So in this scenario, we're imagining that we already have a data fabric, and maybe we've used it for our past 2 projects. But this project, as we saw, is going to result in us adding new data, as well as augmenting or extending existing data. So the yellow is the new, and the pink is the expanded or extended. So as you're creating your project, as you're delivering it, you're using the fabric to weave together interconnected views. So if we look at just this one node here, let's say that this is a view of customer. We're trying to build a customer 360. So we may take a slice of data or a thread of data from maybe Salesforce, and maybe we're extending that with autonomous data that is originating in the fabric itself. Or maybe we're enriching all that data, regardless if it originated on the fabric or if it originated in a source system like a Salesforce. But maybe we're taking yet another data source and doing further enrichment with that. And so on and so forth. So the fabric is the technology that enables it to weave together that interconnected view where that node is now added to the network and connected to the other nodes that were already there from past projects, as well as other nodes that are part of that same project. So that's just an example of the managing data as a network. And if you want to know more about this, if you watch episode 1, which is really covering it as it relates to your target architecture. So that was our initial episode, or episode 9. Episode 9 goes into the details of how you actually do that. What is it like when you're connecting data in and out, and real-time data streaming and bidirectional, and all the considerations that need to go in, and you can see it kind of live in action, how that actually works with a real example. So that's the first concept. The next concept is the idea of zero copy integration, which is where data should be collaborated on, not replicated, not copied. So this is where there's magic in moving data into the center, because in the traditional approach, you have data in application 1 that then needs to be replicated to application 2. Maybe that's over an API or over an ETL or different technologies, but the same data can exist here. It may even be represented differently. Maybe here it's John Smith, but here it's Johnny Smith, but they have the same social security number. So that's the first phenomenon. But from a control perspective and a data privacy perspective, the challenge there is that the individual apps have different controls that's often implemented in code. So this particular user may not be able to see or change data based on the controls that are defined here, but the controls through this alternate entry point may be fundamentally different. So there's no way at scale to guarantee consistency. But by moving those controls to the data layer itself, that's where it gets interesting, because now it's not only easier to maintain, it's guaranteed that they are consistent. So no matter how you're interacting with that data via this capability, or maybe it's through a reporting package or visualization, the controls are now defined once that can be managed by the owner and universally enforced. So this truly enables data ownership at scale, which is, traditionally you kind of try and implement that through processes and procedures and having a governance program. But this is the systemization of that capability such that it becomes non-negotiable, it's guaranteed, there's no way to circumvent that. So that's the control aspect. And if you're interested in going deeper into zero copy integration and how to think through and rationalize and configure granular controls down to even a data cell level, then episode 7, which is titled Universal Controls, is a good one to watch.
Dan, I have a question here. How do you manage data modeling to create the initial network?
Yep. So the modeling approach, so let's say that you're starting from scratch, you don't have any prior projects that were implemented on that, your fabric is essentially empty. You're creating the model as it relates to the project that you're delivering. Now, that's very different than traditional thinking, where when you're trying to build an enterprise model, you're trying to build the ontology and define it up front. But here, because of the capabilities of plasticity, it means you can build it iteratively. So think of it as, for the same reason you're going to do agile software development, you can now do agile data modeling, where you deliver it fit for purpose for that particular project. Then when you deliver the next project, you can change, you can extend, you can augment that, and the plasticity protects the first project from breaking as a result of those changes. So you're able to build your enterprise model federated and iteratively, where it's continuously changing like a living organism, and you're creating the semantic model that makes sense, not to technologists, quite frankly, but to the business. So you're creating that business model as you go. So the third concept is the idea of autonomous data. So autonomous data is really data that can be born on the fabric. It doesn't need to be created at all inside of an application. So for the most part, today you have apps and data originates in an app of some kind, either that or a device if it's an IoT context, but it's originating there, and any consolidation play, a warehouse, a march, a data lake is really intended to then take copies of that data. And any other system that needs to refer to that is going to, again, get copies of that data. So autonomous data is data that is originated in an environment that it can be used by many applications, but it's not owned by any application at all. It's self-controlling. So the idea is that you have, it's self-describing, self-governing. It has its own built-in interface. It features all the controls that you would ever want on data, automatic data version control. So if you're familiar with things like Git for source code, but the same concept for not only data, but the metadata itself, where it's essentially enabling a time machine view. And the separation of the transient metadata from the perpetual metadata is ultimately that secret sauce behind the plasticity that allows the different applications to interact with your autonomous data, while that autonomous data's model can change and evolve over time. So imagine new information, new entities, new attributes as you need to create them, because data is not finite. It's not just adding new rows of data into your existing model. There's new columns, there's new tables all the time, new regulations, new customers, new products. And as you're doing that, you're using autonomous data as the preferred mechanism to manage and control that new information, knowing that it has those built-in capabilities. So if we go back to our hypothetical project, The new capability is ultimately it's going to need to have a memory, just like every other application. An app that doesn't store data or use data is maybe a game. It's not used in a business context. So rather than standing up an app-specific control layer, an app-specific database with an app-specific data model, it's using autonomous data where it exists on the fabric and the fabric alone. And through that fabric, it has the built-in controls and it has the ability to connect into other data. And it's now available not only through the experience that you create here, but that data can also be now made available through future experiences, as well as through the data browser, which is, think about as the universal experience for all information on the fabric. So if the idea of autonomous data is of interest and you want to go deeper, there's actually 2 episodes to take a look at. The first is episode 2, which is called Application Augmentation, where you're taking existing systems that could be legacy systems like the Salesforce or it could be a mainframe, and you're adding new capabilities, but those new capabilities need to manage data as well. It's augmenting not only the capabilities of the software, but the capabilities that are stored in the data model. And it's using autonomous data to do that. And then episode 3 goes deeper into autonomous data. And again, it shows you how that works at a much more deep level, and even gives you some real live examples of creating autonomous data and how those controls work. So the 4th concept is the idea of collaborative intelligence, and don't confuse that with a collective intelligence, but it's the idea that intelligence should be real-time, it should be operational, it should be continuous, in the same way that a child who touches a stove and get burned, they know not to touch that stove again. That's how it should work in our systems. It would not work if the child learning to not touch the stove required you to take copies of data from various operational systems and store it in a central lake in raw form, only then to curate it and to create an organized warehouse, only then to run some complex, sophisticated analytics on top of that connected information, only then to figure out how the heck do you operationalize that insight, that stove hot, don't touch. It doesn't work that way in nature, and it won't work that way in the systems of the future. It will immediately know, ouch, that hurt, I'm not touching that again, and move on and incorporate that knowledge, that intelligence on a continual basis. That's the future of intelligence, and that's the idea of collaborative intelligence. So data is not the new oil. It is intelligence that is ultimately going to be that differentiator. And that's why you really don't want to be data-driven as an organization. Data-driven is, if you ever watch Star Trek, it's like the Borg. They are non-autonomous or mindless, essentially, agents of a central hive mind. Your fingers are data-driven. You have your brain, which is your body's hive mind. But all of us who are on this call have different brains, and for a good reason. So that's the idea of a collaborative intelligence capability, where us as a species, as a society, are intelligence-driven. What that means is we retain autonomy, we have independent thought, and we can collaborate, but collaborating isn't releasing control over our data. So you can collaborate over the English language, you can collaborate through culture to pass intelligence down across generations. Those are examples of natural collaborative intelligence platforms, but the introduction of the data fabric and the data mesh network and the introduction of autonomous data together really create that collaborative intelligence platform for information management in complex organizations. So it's really bringing that natural capability to the enterprise. So if you're interested in more deeper insights into what that actually translates to, then episode 11 covers revenue intelligence. So it shows real examples of how to apply this new capability to revenue generating and revenue retention functions. And there's some pretty neat examples there in how to do that. And episode 14 takes that same intelligence capability, but applies it to the context of customer success. And I'll, of course, keep in mind that that same capability can be applied to the entire organization. So the 5th capability or concept is the idea of plasticity. Where if you, again, look at nature, intelligence just can't happen without, in humans, for example, neuroplasticity. So it's that plasticity that enables us to grow our intellectual ability from that of a newborn child to a fully mature adult. If we didn't have the ability for our brains to reorganize itself as we learn, then we wouldn't be advancing. We'd be we'd be kind of stuck at that intellectual capability of a newborn child. So the design here is really just leveraging the pattern that already is demonstrated to unlock real intelligence, not artificial, but real intelligence, and bring that to the enterprise. So what you're doing with that, though, is you're now moving away from building apps to building business capabilities, where those capabilities can use models, because it's not about having everyone use the single central mega model, the ontology for the entire world. That's not feasible. You're able to build models. It could be a model specific to one context. It could be a model for an organization. It could be a vendor's model. It's a multi-model universe. But those models are now able to be installed into an organization's fabric, which creates the linkage between the model's representation and the physical representation. And once that link is established, either side can now change and evolve independent from each other. So that model A can change, but the physical structures will be protected from that, and vice versa. So it's that decoupling of data from the applications that is, it's quite frankly magical, that enables the evolution of schema at scale, which is very different than the traditional rigid architecture that exists. And as you're thinking about delivering your projects, it opens up really a set of patterns that you can now apply. So think of these as templates, as blueprints that you can leverage these capabilities of plasticity and autonomous data to create intelligent business capabilities for your projects. So we're not going to go through these in depth today, but if you're interested to learn more about plasticity and the intelligence enabling platform and the intelligence enabling design patterns and templates, episode 8 goes really deep into plasticity, where you can see it in action. And episode 12 goes deeper into those patterns that I just walked through.
And I have a question here from the audience. What is the timeline when the intelligence will be readily available in the data fabric? Would you not have to distill the data to arrive at the intelligence?
Yeah, so you can't have the intelligence without the data, for sure. The data is an input into the intelligence, but it can start really as you're, it starts from your first project, but it grows exponentially. So I can give a really quick example of that. If I look here, so hopefully you can all see my screen, but here I have an address, and then I have an intelligent address. And you can see here I typed in 1 Main Street, Toronto, and it's resolved it to that. And if I just blank that out, you can see it's blanking this out. So this is basically, it's the intelligent version of this. So if I type, let's say, Cincy, instead of the actual address, well, that happens to be our actual address. If I type in a landmark, so we're based out of Toronto, so I'm going to say the CN Tower. Well, that's the address of the CN Tower. And if I go back and type 1 Main Street, but I spell it wrong, it's going to, first of all, make an assumption that in this case it's Brooklyn. But if I now qualify that to say Toronto, then it's resolving it and it's giving me the postal code. So this is a really, really, really simple example of just applying intelligence to a field. Now, behind the scenes, it's using collaborative intelligence. And that past episode will go into even showing you how this example works. But that's in the context of the one project, but with multiple projects, it grows and gets to a level that on the surface may appear to be magic, but it's not. It's actually very simple behind the scenes.
Thanks, Dan. Just a comment here. I know that we are going a little over time, so thank you very much. If you'd like to stick around, Dan has 2 more concepts that he wants to take you through, and we've also provided a PDF that you can easily access all the videos that Dan is referring to. Over to you, Dan.
So the 6th concept is the idea of metadata experiences. So the World Wide Web would be pretty boring if there was no web browser to interface with that. So an interconnected network of data needs a browser too. So that's really what you were just seeing, but it's the ability to create rich experiences that could be web, that could be mobile, that could be AR, VR, as well as the ability to navigate that web. So you saw, for example, the network map and other concepts, and the ability to create even custom experiences. Really creating a universal interface to be able to interact with data, not to view it and report on it, but to be able to manage it and really just manage it end-to-end, the entire end-to-end spectrum. So Cincy TV itself is an example of an experience that was built. So it uses a metadata-driven approach, and there is a video on Century TV, which is the making of Century TV. You can see how it was built in a day, and it will decompose exactly what was avoided as a result of leveraging not data, but the metadata to essentially dynamically create the interface, especially in this case, on the internal experience that Joanne and the team used to manage the production of the video-based content and the transcriptions and the approval process and all of that. So what you're really doing here is you're simply cutting out IT complexity, because you can define your metadata once and now have it be utilized in a very creative way, in this case, to influence and inform and even automate the generation of rich interfaces. So there's a couple of episodes there. One is metadata-driven forms, episode 6, and episode 10 goes into application experiences, which is creating custom experiences. And in that one, we walk through Century TV just as a simple example. And then the last concept is the idea that data is the application, which is I guess the realization of them being completely separate concerns. And that's really where, as an organization, you need to have an enabling architecture. And that architecture may be multiple technologies, but it needs to fit together to enable data centricity. So the base of that is really the ability to have persistence with controls at the persistence layer. And that is a combination of any data that may be cached from your existing internal and external systems, as well as autonomous data, where all of that is now wrapped around those universal controls to guarantee data privacy and data governance and make that automated. The next layer on top of that is the ability to create semantic models, not a single ontology, but a multi-model representation of that. So the same cell of data can be represented 1,000 different ways, and that's okay. And as long as you have plasticity that enables once that link is established, it stays in lockstep and never breaks. It means you can change the schema, you can collapse models, break models apart. It gives you that freedom and flexibility. The next layer on top of your model and metadata layer is really creating the system interface for software, for code. And that's a combination of universal query engine to interact with all of that data, view, change, CRUD, complex transactions, et cetera, and making that available as really a service API that's providing true data as a service. And then on top of that, the left side is the ability to connect in, to bridge from the new world to the old world. You need to move data in, you need to move data out, and really create that bridge, that highway that connects the two together. And then on the right is the need to create human interfaces. So the data browser is dynamic and metadata driven, but you can create custom experiences that also can be powered by metadata, so that you don't have to, for example, write code that alters the screen's behavior to show a field to be read-only if you don't have access. That should be dynamic, it should be driven by, and that's the control data. That's just a really simple example. So episodes that go deeper here is episode 13, where we went into a lot of the myths around data centricity in a data fabric, where we were joined by our friends at Capco. And last week's episode, where we were joined with Sylvie, just really looking at the bigger picture in terms of what does all of this mean when data becomes the platform, especially as it relates to from a CIO's perspective. So Joanne, do you want to take it from here?
Certainly. So just very quickly, we have actually created the PDF, and I've already put that link directly in the chat. So you can just click onto that and you can access any of the videos. We've followed through with the pattern of being able to very quickly identify which of the 7 concepts that Dan has presented, and then you can just click on each of the videos and watch them at your leisure. I do have a couple of questions here in the actual chat, which would be, would you need Kafka like streaming engines for real-time data transfer?
So you definitely can do that. So for scenarios where you do need real-time in or real-time out, so absolutely. There are other scenarios where you may hook into other real-time mechanisms. So as a simple example, for our platform, we have the real-time connector for Salesforce that leverages Salesforce's own preferred design for basically facilitating real-time data synchronization. But definitely that is an option where you need true real-time data streaming, and it has that connectivity capability built into it.
And another question is, how do you manage integration with third-party on-prem apps such as SAP?
Right. So the connectors, and if you're looking at any data fabric, you're going to want to just look at the connectivity of that. But for example, Synchrony comes with connectors for JDBC and ODBC. It has SAP connectors, Salesforce connectors, anything REST, OData, delimited files. So generally, and those connectors can move data in, move data out, could be real-time, batch, intraday, end of day, etc. Is usually you're at worst case scenario, you're one hop away. So you mentioned SAP, but if let's say you had an internal system that was internally developed, it was proprietary, there's no open standard for that. As long as you can get the data out, frankly, through any standard, it could be a delimited file, then you're able to now get that data in. The only thing that may limit you is the frequency at which you can perform that refresh, which does require that system to have some type of capability to make that data available either on demand through push or pull mechanisms.
And that's it for the questions. So join us next week. We actually know that there's a lot of questions that are burning that many of you want to have more opportunity to ask both Dan and also Karin, who is our CTO and co-founder. So we've set up a session for next week, which is going to be a Synchrony office hour, so sort of an open mic that you'll be able to bring your questions and ask both Dan and Karin directly any of your questions. I've put the link in the chat that you can easily just click on that and sign up directly right now for that. And again, thank you very much for attending these sessions. We really do appreciate all of the time that you spend with us. If you're looking for a deeper dive, you can just click on over to synchrony.com/dive-deeper, and you can actually book a customized session that you can ask those specific questions that you're more comfortable asking one-on-one that pertain directly to your customer or to your business. So just feel free to click on that, and we'd love to spend time with you directly on that.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.